answering some subscribers about the Winchester topic you wrote in letters. Before the Winchester, other repeating weapons were invented, but the Winchester wasn't adopted simply because it was too expensive weapon for the government to buy in masses and arm an army with it. Besides, the caliber of the Winchester didn't meet the specifications that the government was asking for. The government wanted a larger, more powerful caliber. A rifle caliber. The Winchester really, even though it's a big piece of bullet, at that time it was considered a hunting caliber. So for that simple reason, and already a reason aside from the fact that it had a very complex mechanism, there was a mechanism that had some kind of... There could have a malfunction to take up the ass. You had to have a gunsmith, because the average guy didn't have a clue how the Winchester worked. And it was a weapon that, with dust, water, and those things, it ended up getting dirty. And it ended up being damaged, because it had so many moving parts. Before the Winchester, the repeating carbine that the U.S. Army did adopt was the Sharps carbine. It's a much simpler, much more conventional design, and it's actually even easier to operate, much more conventional, with a heavier caliber. But it wasn't very successful either for the same reasons I'm telling you, because it had a lot of moving parts and it was a radical change in the firearms system that not everyone in the U.S. Army liked. Those types of carbines, like the Winchester styles, with that lever system, were invented primarily and solely for cavalry, people on horseback. Why? Because of the ease of reloading, the ease of operating the firing mechanism, and its length. It was a very short weapon. It really had almost no range. We're talking about combat distances of 300 to 400 meters maximum. It didn't reach those distances. It had a calibratable sight, but it wasn't at all accurate at those distances. So the Army preferred old rifles. They preferred precision and a simple-to-use weapon that didn't cause problems, but not one that caused few. No, they wanted one that didn't cause any problems on the battlefield, in the middle of a skirmish, so that if your weapon failed, it would be due to user error. And they wanted it with the easiest, simplest, and cheapest ammunition, because the Winchester used copper cartridges, and the Army at that time was looking for the cheapest. The cheapest. Paper cartridges. Cardboard cartridges. The simplest possible. The simplest possible that cost the least money. So they could arm the largest number of troops possible. It wasn't for any other reason. So that's why you see the Winchester in cowboys, because it was people who bought it and could afford it. Because they didn't use it daily. They weren't fighting all day with the Winchester. They used it very occasionally to defend themselves from animals, defending themselves from bandits or Indians. And that's it. It wasn't a combat weapon as such. That's which is why it's so luxurious. Before the Winchester 1870 model, if I'm not mistaken, there was another one, the Litchfield, which you can see and say, damn, that's a Winchester. But it's much simpler, because it's longer. It has a much longer barrel, because that one was intended for use by infantry. It doesn't have a handguard. You grab the barrel directly. And if I remember correctly, I think it ended up not being adopted. Also for the same reason as the Winchester, which was very cumbersome. And because it used ammunition that wasn't cheap, but it fulfilled the same function as the Winchester. Well, the same function, but better. However, it's not as famous, because it wasn't as elaborate. It was like a kind of prototype that never caught on in the American market. But before these, in the Civil War, you had the Henry rifle. But they were such expensive weapons and so complicated to manufacture at that time that the government bought very few, or even formed a unit of shooters with those rifles, because you want that rifle to be owned by a guy with good aim, you know, because it's a good weapon. So you're interested in a guy who, I don't know, can fire those 8 shots in half a minute. Maybe. Exaggerating a lot. But who shot them accurately. What you need is some guys well positioned. Half a dozen guys in a grove of them, climbing the fucking trees with rifles that they'll be able to reload right there, that they'll be able to handle well. That will be precise, and that will wreak havoc. That's why you had the infantry rifles, which were muskets that were basically easy to manufacture and couldn't fail. I mean, they had a mechanism that was truly infallible if you took good care of it, and that's it. And that was the backbone of the infantry weapon. Then you had those types of more modern, more innovative weapons for elite shooting, for marksmen, for archers, for chosen men, and for all these people that is effort. And that's why they were so common among civilians. Because if they wanted a great weapon, of course, a civilian didn't depend on the army to buy one at that time. So why would I have a musket if I could have this? And that's all for today, freaks. Thompson says goodbye on his Delasurgic podcast in collaboration with Tactical Sheet.